So practicing, having your instrument preparation. Beyond those basics, what do you need to do to be successful? What are the rules, the guidelines that the audition committee has set forth? The Sacramento Youth Symphony has 5 orchestras. 5 orchestras. Each orchestra has its own set of audition requirements. There's prelude, vivace strings, classic, academic, and premier. There's a website that you look into, and it lists requirements, suggestions for possible pieces for you to learn to perform. There's a spot for everyone in the Sacramento Youth Symphony. There's a spot for everyone. Let's say you want to go for a top orchestra. The top would be, let's say, academic or premier. You probably already have some experience with auditioning if you're going for one of those 2 orchestras. If you don't, make sure you seek out a qualified teacher along with reviewing your audition requirements. For instance, Premier Orchestra is the highest level, the toughest set of standards, okay? If you're going to audition for the Premier Orchestra and you play in Allegro from Suzuki Book 2 in a 1-octave C major scale, the judges are going to go, well, that sounded good, but that doesn't sound like premier level. Know what the requirements are. Check the website. Make sure that your teacher has experience guiding people through successful auditions. Maybe your teacher has themselves auditioned. Maybe they play professionally. Maybe they have other students in the Sacramento Youth Symphony who have completed successful auditions. So having a good teacher provides you with information, feedback, and guidance for you to have a successful audition. When you play your audition music, let's say you're playing Haydn, cello concerto. You're auditioning for the Premier Orchestra. Your teacher should guide you into playing Haydn according to the style of Haydn. Okay, you don't play Haydn like you would play a Shostakovich. Play your music in the style that it should be played. And that goes along with knowing the music. And to know the music, it's surprising, a little bit surprising to me, how many people will study and perform a piece of music without actually having listened to it. And that really is so important. Listening and knowing how a piece of music is supposed to sound is not going to make you an expert at playing it, but it's going to help speed up the learning process. There are many different types of auditions. The primary one we're talking about here is the orchestral audition, and we have set up an example of how a string player might audition for the Sacramento Youth Symphony. You have a divided screen here. The purpose of that is so the judges can listen impartially to whoever's playing on the other side of the screen and rate them according to purely their performance. All they're listening to is the music. The judge wouldn't see who you are. I don't know if you're male or female. I don't know if you're 6 feet tall or 2.5 feet tall. The Sacramento Youth Symphony Group goes to great pains to make it as fair as possible for every single person in the organization or who wants to be part of the organization. And that's actually my experience with most auditions, even outside of Sacramento Youth Symphony. A lot of people, let's say they don't get what they want, might say in their mind, oh, it's probably fixed, or I didn't talk to the right people to get the spot that I wanted, you know, or I knew I should have given so-and-so a Christmas present this year, you know? No, it doesn't work that way, and it's best not to think that way. You simply do the best that you can, and the outcome will probably be a just outcome.
And by the way, we usually have 2 adjudicators.
Yes.
Not 1. So that, again, it sort of levels the playing field. to make things as fair as possible.
There are other types of auditions than what you see here. Some professional auditions have screens, some do not. There are also, as you go up the audition ladder, let's say, when you audition, let's say, for a high school musical or a college scholarship or a concerto competition with the youth symphony perhaps, or anything like that, very often those auditions are not behind a screen. Half an hour is best to arrive before your audition. Okay? Stringed instruments need to settle down a little bit in a new environment. You have them tuned as best you can before you go in, because you don't want to take too much time. Auditions go pretty fast, ladies and gentlemen. They go maybe 6-8 minutes at the most per audition, and they run all day long.
You come up there and you sign in, so the youth symphony knows you're there. Then they will send you to upstairs to a practice room where you can warm up, and somebody will come and get you 5, 6, 7 minutes before, and then you sit and wait outside the room, and then somebody guides you into the room. So it runs, as Leo said, very smoothly. I changed the rules some time ago when the parents wanted to be right sitting there with their nose up against the window, because they're more nervous than the young person.
Yeah.
So we changed that. I don't want parents anywhere too close.
Yeah.
Because it just freaks the kid out.
Dylan has graciously agreed to run a mock audition. Hopefully Dylan, being a cellist, is fully prepared. He would not really know what type of floor he's going to audition on, so he would bring an end-pin anchor because he's a cellist. He would make sure that his cello is secured. In a youth symphony audition, there would be no talking back and forth. The students are instructed to not speak, and the judges, the only speaking they do to the auditionee is to tell them when to begin. Youth symphony usually begins with scales. So we're in the afternoon, and I have a form that says there's a cello player coming in, and I'll say, I don't know the person's name, I'll say, good afternoon. When you're ready, please begin with your scales. Then hopefully he would pause just a little bit, because I would be writing something down on the rating sheet. Next, your minor scale. And I would rate that performance, and I would give comments on that. And scales, I think, are usually on a 10-point scale, let's say. Okay. So I would give certain amounts of the major scale, certain amounts of the minor. There's a comment section. I could write some comments based on that. Okay. Premier also calls for a scale with staccato. If you're in prelude or vivace, maybe even classic, you may or may not know what staccato is. So I would say, if you have staccato, please do that now. So the scale requirements were fulfilled. And then I would say, you may play your solo now. Okay, thank you. And the reason why I jumped in before Dylan was finished, thank you so much, Dylan, is that the premier requirements are for 2 movements of Bach. And so I know that if I were to let him finish the whole prelude, that we would have little or no time for the second movement that he prepared. So I would say, let's go to your other movement of Bach now, please. And so that might happen at an audition. Okay, that would be a judge's discretion to let you finish one complete movement. You know, judges do have to keep an eye on the clock. So you may not play a whole piece of music. Before Dylan goes on to his second movement, keep in mind that you're there to impress people. And so, of course, you're going to start at the beginning of your piece of music. You and your teacher might have you choose that which you could say shows off your potential the best. For instance, maybe this piece, even though it qualifies for premiere, it's on the easier side for a premiere level audition. Somebody that plays this versus somebody that plays, say, the Dvorak cello concerto, or even Haydn cello concerto, which Dylan can play also. If they were to play that in an audition, it might be a little bit more impressive, as long as you can play it well, because the difficulty level is higher. And a judge is going to probably be more impressed if you play a difficult piece well versus something a little bit easier. You want to pick something that shows off a variety of skills: legato, staccato, rapid passage work, double stops, things of that nature would really show off your playing very well. This is a mock audition. Of course, I wouldn't be saying these things at an audition, but we're here to learn. Dylan, your second movement of Bach, please. Thank you very much. There would be sight reading. Sight reading is where a piece of music is put in front of you that you don't know or haven't seen previous to the audition. You might already know it if you're lucky, because if you played it already, that puts you, kind of gives you a leg up on it. But sight reading typically is something that you have never seen before, and it's simply reading, playing music on sight. It's already on the stand when you go in for the audition, okay? They're in a folder usually, and they're labeled clearly, beginning and advanced, okay? And the judge will say, choose one of the two, okay? Sometimes I have seen and heard judges say, if you're going for premiere, you should choose the advanced. Because, actually a couple times I have heard people go for premiere, but they choose the beginning, sight reading. And sight reading is not easy, so they want to make sure they do a good job on that. So, in that case, I would say it's better to choose the more advanced and just struggle your way through. Honestly, my whole time that I've heard many auditions, and most people don't do very well on sight reading, okay? That's normal. Sight reading is about 3 lines. It's not like a whole page of music, and you do have about 30, 40 seconds. Because, at the most. If you take too long, the judge will say, you'll need to begin now, because you have to do it. or not, but then you're going to be rated accordingly. I have heard people silently practicing, banging their fingers on the notes on the fingerboard a little bit. You can do a little bit of that, and it's good. But then you won't have very much time, okay? You should scan it with your eyes beginning to end, looking at the key, signature, tempo indicators, okay? Some of the sight reading does not have the composer's name on it, so looking at the music, see if you can determine the era that the music was written in, okay? That's, of course, a more advanced level.
If you don't start your sight reading within the amount of time and they have to tell you, will they mark that down and give points off your audition?
No, that won't affect your score. So Dylan, if you don't mind, would you tell us a little bit about what you felt about today and also how you felt about some of your past auditions? Let's start with today's playing.
Well, as in all auditions, you almost always, unless you're a perfect player, which I certainly am not, you'll always make mistakes. And what makes a great audition compared to a bad audition is how you come back from those mistakes. Because everybody has an intonation problem, or maybe their fingering went wrong, or their bow just went the wrong way. But if you bounce back from it, nobody will ever notice, because that's the advantage of having a big screen between you and your judge.
Yeah, I love that, what he said about bounce back quickly from any error or perceived error. I teach a lot of public school students, and they play for grades, and some of them will make a mistake and completely stop after that. Well, guess what? After you stop, everything is a mistake, because you did nothing after that. How do you feel about some of your past auditions? Were there any surprises for you?
Well, oftentimes, this is my main problem. I didn't realize this at first, but even with sight reading, there's a way you can practice for it. Oftentimes, you can get new books or borrow a book from a friend of music and sit down and sight read it, because the more you do that, the more you sight read, the easier it will be when you finally get to the audition and you have a new piece of music in front of you. I've never had a piece of music on a singing audition, or rather an audition, that I've seen before for my sight reading.
That's an extremely good point. How do you become a good sight reader? Play a lot of music. How do you become a good reader? Read a lot. Read a lot of books. Read. Same with music. Becoming a good sight reader, the more types of music you'll play, the more you'll be able to recognize the language of music as it appears in print and as it translates to your instrument. So play lots of music. Don't just play your one concerto and one scale, and that's it. When you keep thinking back on your first audition, was it what you expected?
First of all, I didn't expect for there to be a big screen in front of the judges. I expected to be face to face. And it was actually quite nice to me because if I can't see the person that I'm playing to, I can almost imagine that I'm in a different room at my house just by myself. And it was different than I expected in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like it was not all bad.
No, it wasn't that. I actually quite enjoyed the experience. Butterflies in your stomach always happen, but it's quite a feeling to be gearing up for so long and then finally have that moment where you've done what you wanted to do. And maybe you get it, maybe you don't, but that doesn't matter. You've tried your best, and that's a good feeling.
You can play by memory. The judges won't know whether it's memorized or not because it's behind the screen. So memorization, I'm a fan of it, but not for auditions because it's not necessary. Okay, now memorization happens to me if you know a piece of music really well. It just happens anyway. You won't get any extra points for memorization. There's a screen there, okay? Now, the only points you might get is if your child somehow always plays better without looking at music. That's possible. But it's also possible they would have a memory lapse. I would put the music on the stand and play by memory with the music in front of you on the stand.
You're not required to have a teacher, but it sure helps to get a good teacher helps, whether you're in music or in astronomy.
Yes. If you don't have a teacher, a lot of mistakes happen. Let's go back to where I was talking about a pretty advanced student that played a Haydn C major cello concerto in the style of Shostakovich. I suspect that person either had a very unqualified teacher or no teacher at all. And they didn't really know how to play the piece of music. They figured it out. They played it incorrectly.
Leo's now talking about pretty advanced playing.
Yes.
When you're younger, just hitting the right notes at the right time is enough. Then it's not a matter of playing in one style or another.
Yes.
That is learned over time and with maturity.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the criteria that are used when someone is in an audition? What are the adjudicators looking for? How are you judging them?
That's great. I will do that. Thank you. So here's what judges look for, and there's a rating scale. Okay. Judges work for good rhythm, intonation, tone, style if you're more advanced, tempo, and dynamics. Okay, those are some primary qualities. Okay? Let's separate that. Let's take something like intonation. Okay? Most people, now there's a little bit of variation with intonation even, depending on who you talk to, depending on where the harmonies lead in music, but that's getting more advanced, okay? It can be pretty obvious, like let's say scales. It's pretty obvious if they're in tune or not, okay? Maybe you like the leading tones a little higher or not, okay? But it's pretty obvious. So when you're playing, you want to leave as little room as possible for any kind of criticism, okay? If you play in tune with correct rhythms, a good quality sound, there's very little you can criticize about that. Where criticism might come in is very subjective. Well, a judge might think, I would have liked a little bit faster tempo, or I would have liked the phrasing to be a little bit different. That's a little bit more subjective, okay? And that all does play a part, but it's a much smaller part than the basics of correct rhythm, intonation, correct notes, okay? That sort of thing. That's a very good question, yes. So that's what's looked for. And typically there's will be like a 15-point scale, let's say, of tone. 15-point scale of tone. And a premier qualified person would be generally, now I'm talking maybe how I would rate somebody. Premier would rate a 12, 13, or 14. on tone out of a total of 15, 15 being the highest. Okay? You almost never give somebody the absolute highest. It can happen though. It can. If you can't, in your wildest imagination, imagine anybody on this planet could possibly play any better than what you just heard, then give them a 15. But, 14 leaves a little bit of room for improvement, and it's a very good score. Okay? And now academic would be maybe 10 or 11 or 12 maybe. So that gives you an idea, out of 15, 15 being the highest. And that's for intonation. It would be the same with tone.
A lot of people really are aiming to get to the top. You have to be very careful because that might not serve either the group or the young person. Saying that you want to get into this orchestra or that orchestra is meaningful to you, but is not meaningful to me. Because it doesn't really matter what you're auditioning for. What the adjudicators listen for is where they feel you best belong. Where the ensemble benefits, but also your child benefits. It would be stupid to put a child into an ensemble that the music's too difficult for them to play. There's no win on anybody's side. And so, as Leo said, we grade on a variety of subjects, intonation, rhythm, etc. Those get collated and we crunch the numbers, and then the conductors meet at a meeting 2 or 3 days after the auditions, and then we make a determination of what ensemble the young person should be in, where the young one feels good. Maybe it's not what they wanted, but this is where the level is. Also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that in life, everything is relative. So when somebody comes to me and says, my kid played first in their school orchestra, it means nothing to me. Young people who play the clarinet on that given day auditioning for the youth symphony, that's the comparison, not where they sit in their school orchestra. Tempos of scales are indicated on our website in the instructions. So,
they're on there.
The spiccato, whatever, 120 beats per minute, 4 notes to the bow, or 144 for the quarter. It's indicated for each group what is required.
Yep, the guidelines are on the website, and the judges are aware of those guidelines. So if somebody plays the required scale at a very slow speed, that will cause them to get a lower score. Well, everything is rated just according to its own category. So there's a category for the major scale, rating. Category for the minor scale, the rating. Category for spiccato, let's say if it's premier, a rating. Categories for the solo, okay, the solos have the most categories. Style, tempo, dynamics, articulation, that sort of thing. Then there's a sight reading category, okay? I give it the ratings, and then I or whoever's adjudicating hands it in to the office, and they tally it up.
Again, it's trying to be as fair as we can, etc. And by the way, people who've been in the SYS for a year already get 10 extra points added automatically to their score. I would say the technical ability is probably the most important thing we look for. So if somebody plays with fantastic intonation, great rhythm, but they play Mary Had a Little Lamb, that will not count to get into certain groups, even though it was perfect what they did. So the level of the piece you choose does make a difference. Usually, within about 2 weeks, our office then sends out the results.
Everyone that auditions, do they actually find a place for them?
We make, it's very rare that somebody just simply doesn't qualify. So if somebody comes and just sort of squeaks and squawks on whatever instrument it is, we probably don't have a place for that. Maybe we'll create it in another year, but at this moment, there's not. So, the Sacramento Youth Symphony has grown immensely over the years. It started out as one group, 50, 55 young people, that's what it, so now, instead of 55 people, we have 400, and we kept adding as the demand grew. Unlike many schools, and schools are wonderful, but in the school, you may have 20 or 30 musicians, and it's just those that go to that school. Our kids come from 40 or 50 different schools, from all the way from Vacaville and Yuba City, and people are willing to drive 90 minutes, some of them, to come, their parents drive them to Sacramento Youth Symphony because we have something wonderful to offer. The very best way to gauge if a young person is interested, that I recommend to people, is bring them to a concert of kids about their age. We have those. And then the little one sits there and goes, I want to do that.
Yeah.
That's how it starts. You know, it's getting them a little bit involved, letting them see and experience. That is a very wonderful way for a young person to say, I want to do that. Not you want them to do it, I want to do it myself. Let's give a very warm thank you to you.